What was going on in the studio, though, was a real tug of war going down to Mexico to shoot Catch 22. But like a lot of movies, it just ran over.
At 84 years old, Paul Simon has lived a life that most musicians can only dream of. As the creative mind behind some of the most enduring songs of the 20th century, he helped shape a generation through words, melodies, and a partnership that the world talks about today. But behind the legendary music lies a story of childhood friendship and a relationship that slowly fractured under the weight of success. At 84, Paul Simon is finally opening up about why he could not sustain a working relationship with Art Garfunkel. In this video, we will find out the truth, the friendship that became a partnership. When Paul Simon speaks about his earliest days with Art Garfunkel, something shifts in his delivery. The sharpness fades. What replaces it is something more careful, almost tender, like a man handling an old photograph he has not looked at in years. Simon and Garfunkel met as children in Queens, New York, in 1953, when both were cast in a school production of Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. Simon played the White Rabbit. Garfunkel played the Cheshire Cat. That detail alone tells you something about how their dynamic would eventually unfold. They grew up just 3 blocks apart in the Kew Garden Hills neighborhood of Queens. Both boys loved early rock and roll. Both were drawn to the Everly Brothers, the tight harmonies, the clean sound, the way 2 voices could lock together and create something a single voice never could. By the mid-1950s, they were performing together under the name Tom and Jerry, not after the cartoon, but from their chosen aliases. Garfunkel became Tom Graff, a name rooted in his love of mathematics, and Simon became Jerry Landis, a name borrowed from a girl he had a crush on. Behind the playful names was something serious, ambition, and a drive to be heard. At 15, they signed to Sid Prosen's Big Records after he overheard them recording Hey Schoolgirl in a Manhattan studio. The $25 recording became a minor hit after Prosen paid DJ Alan Freed to play it on air. That moment was intoxicating. Paul Simon would later say that having a hit record at 16 made him a neighborhood hero, that nothing before or after quite matched the feeling of that early, unexpected rush of recognition. But even in those earliest days, an imbalance existed that neither of them fully acknowledged. Simon was the songwriter. He wrote the melodies. He ran the sessions. Garfunkel brought his voice, an instrument of remarkable beauty and range, but the creative engine was always Simon's. When things slowed after their initial run as Tom and Jerry, Simon cut several solo songs without telling Garfunkel, effectively leaving their partnership behind without warning. Garfunkel had nowhere to go, because without Simon's songs there was no act to return to. That quiet act of independence in their teenage years planted the first seed of mistrust. They eventually came back together. Their debut album as Simon and Garfunkel, Wednesday Morning, 3 a.m., was released in 1964. It was not a commercial success at first. Simon left for England while the record sat quietly on shelves. Then, something unexpected happened. Producer Tom Wilson overdubbed electric instruments onto their acoustic track, The Sound of Silence, without asking either of them. The result climbed the charts, and by the time it reached number 1 in 1965, Simon and Garfunkel were suddenly stars. What followed was a remarkable stretch of music. Sounds of Silence, Parsley, Sage, Rosemary and Thyme, Bookends, The Graduate soundtrack, and finally, Bridge Over Troubled Water. 5 studio albums between 1964 and 1970, each one deepening their reputation, each one adding to the catalog that would outlast both of them. And through all of it, the same tension ran underneath. Simon wrote everything. Garfunkel sang it. And the world, quite naturally, fell in love with the voice they heard most clearly. Simon reflects now that those early years carried the seeds of everything that would later break apart. The friendship was real. The music was real. But the arrangement was never truly equal. And both of them knew it, even if neither was willing to say so out loud. How long can 2 people share a name and a stage without also sharing the weight of what holds it all together? The creative imbalance that drove them apart. Conversation about Simon and Garfunkel always returns to the same uncomfortable truth. One man wrote the songs. One man sang them. And while the world celebrated both, neither fully accepted the terms of that arrangement in private. Paul Simon has spoken about this with increasing candor in recent years, most notably in the 2024 documentary series In Restless Dreams, The Music of Paul Simon, directed by Alex Gibney and broadcast on MGM+. In that documentary, Simon laid out the frustrations with a plainness that was long overdue. "We had an uneven partnership because I was writing all of the songs and basically running the sessions," Simon said in the documentary. Artie'd be in the control room. He'd say, "Yeah, that's good," but it was an uneven balance of power. That single observation holds more weight than almost anything else Simon has ever said publicly about their relationship. It was not simply that Garfunkel contributed less. It was that Simon was doing the labor of creation while operating under the fiction of equal partnership. That fiction became harder to sustain with every passing album. The deeper wound came with the recording of Bridge Over Troubled Water. Simon wrote the song quickly, almost instinctively, later saying he had no idea where it came from and that it was one of the most shocking moments of his songwriting career. He wrote it as a small gospel hymn. Garfunkel and producer Roy Haley felt it was more epic and convinced Simon to write a third verse. That creative push proved correct. The song became one of the most celebrated in popular music history. But Garfunkel sang it alone. Every night on stage, Simon would step aside, sit off to the wings, and watch the crowd erupt for a voice performing his words. Simon has described those moments with quiet anguish. That response was not simply ego, it was the reaction of a songwriter watching the emotional credit for his most personal workflow entirely in one direction. He understood the feeling was not entirely healthy, but understanding a thing and being free of it are not the same. At the same time, Garfunkel had his own quiet resentment. He knew Simon held the power because Simon held the pen. The royalties went to Simon. The songwriting credit went to Simon. The conceptual direction of the albums went to Simon. Their manager, Mort Lewis, once observed that both men envied the other's place in the team. Simon believed the spotlight favored Garfunkel, while Garfunkel knew Simon wrote the songs and held the real authority. Two men, each watching what the other had, neither fully content with what they possessed themselves. Then came the moment that changed everything permanently. Garfunkel was offered a significant role in Mike Nichols' film Catch-22. He accepted. Simon recalled Garfunkel telling him, "I'm going to do movies for 6 months. Then I'll come back and you'll have written the songs, and we will do the album." Simon's response was immediate and internal. "I thought, yeah, actually, no, that's not going to happen. I am not going to do that." The arrangement Garfunkel described was not a partnership. It was a service agreement. Simon would prepare the material, Garfunkel would return, approve it, lend his voice, and take equal billing. Production delays on Catch-22 made things worse. The shoot ran far longer than the planned 6 months. Simone said the extended absence disrupted everything and described it as a recipe for the breakup of Simon and Garfunkel. By the time Bridge Over Troubled Water was completed and released in 1970, both men were already mentally somewhere else. Garfunkel himself recalled thinking, "When this record's over, I want to rest from Paul Simon," and believed Simon was thinking the same thing. They were right. The album won 6 Grammy Awards. By the end of 1970, Simon had earned $7 million in songwriting royalties from it alone. And yet, the partnership was already finished in everything but name. The decades of bitterness and what it cost them. Simon and Garfunkel are one of the greatest duos in the history of popular music. Yet the years that followed their 1970 breakup were marked by a bitterness that surprised even those closest to them. Both men went on to solo careers of genuine distinction. Simon released some of the most critically praised work of his generation, including the landmark 1986 album, Graceland. Garfunkel recorded solo hits and continued his acting career, earning a Golden Globe nomination for his role in Mike Nichols's Carnal Knowledge in 1971. But the shadow of what they had been together never fully left either of them. Personal tensions between the two men surfaced in ways that went beyond creative disagreement. Simon once recalled a moment during a photo session where Garfunkel told him, "No matter what, I'll always be taller than you." Simon said of that comment, "Did that hurt? I guess it hurt enough for me to remember 60 years later." That detail is instructive. The friction was never purely professional. It ran through the personal, through the history of two boys growing up 3 blocks apart in Queens, through all the years of comparison and proximity and competition that preceded the fame. Their estrangement continued throughout the 1970s, as both explored other musical styles and interests. By 1981, enough time had passed that a reunion felt possible. Simon had just experienced the commercial disappointment of his 1980 album One Trick Pony, and when concert organizers approached him about a free show in Central Park, he thought it might make sense to invite Garfunkel to join him. What neither of them expected was the size of the response. Over 500,000 people gathered on the Great Lawn on September 19, 1981, making it one of the largest concert attendances in history. But behind the spectacle, nothing had actually healed. One Simon associate described the experience as going on vacation with your ex-wife. The concert revived the music, but not the friendship. Plans for a follow-up album and world tour collapsed almost immediately. For the majority of a world tour they undertook together in 1982, the two men did not speak to one another. Songs that had been recorded for a potential joint album were ultimately released as Simon's solo record, Hearts and Bones, in 1983, deepening the sense of betrayal between them. A 1993 run of New York shows brought them back together briefly, but reports described arguments and even physical altercations backstage. One review of those shows claimed Garfunkel was merely part of Simon's supporting cast, a characterization that revived old wounds about credit, billing, and creative identity. Their manager at the time reportedly said that if there had been a knife on the table, one of them would have used it. That description, whether hyperbolic or not, captures how real and sustained the hostility had become. A decade later, the 2003 Grammy Awards offered another moment of apparent reconciliation. Simon and Garfunkel received the Lifetime Achievement Award and performed together, and the resulting warmth led to the Old Friends concert tour, spanning 2003 and 2004. Audiences noted a genuine ease between them on stage that had not always been visible before. That tour ended with a free concert in Rome in front of the Colosseum on July 31, 2004, which drew 600,000 fans, surpassing even their Central Park attendance. For a time, it seemed the worst was behind them. It was not. In January 2010, Garfunkel choked briefly on a piece of lobster and, in the days that followed, developed serious vocal cord problems. A doctor revealed that one vocal cord was stiffer than the other, robbing him of the mid-range finesse that defined his voice. A planned North American tour had to be canceled. Simon, who had invested time and commitment in the tour, never forgave Garfunkel for not being fully transparent about how serious the problem was. That cancellation became the final rupture. Garfunkel, for his part, responded with frustration of his own. In a 2015 interview with The Telegraph, he addressed Simon directly. "How can you walk away from this lucky place on top of the world, Paul? What's going on with you, you idiot? How could you let that go, jerk?" It is hard not to hear something genuinely wounded in those words beneath the provocation. A man who had built his entire identity around a partnership, watching his partner walk away for good. Perspective. At 84, Paul Simon carries the perspective that only age, loss, and enough distance can provide. He is no longer the driven, anxious young man from Queens who needed to prove that the songs were his. He has survived hearing loss that threatened to end his performing career entirely. In 2023, he lost nearly all the hearing in his left ear, a development he described as devastating, one that left him depressed until he came to the philosophical understanding that it was a trial he was meant to endure. In 2025, he returned to the stage for what he called a quiet celebration tour, performing in intimate venues chosen for their acoustics. That return said something about resilience that no interview could fully capture. Against that backdrop, his reflections on Garfunkel have shifted in tone. In the In Restless Dreams documentary, Simon spoke about Garfunkel's friendship with a warmth rarely heard in previous interviews. "We were really best friends up until Bridge Over Troubled Water. It didn't have the harmony of the friendship after that. That was broken. That phrase, "that was broken," does not read like accusation. It reads like grief. The sadness of a man looking back at something he valued and recognizing the exact moment it cracked. Simon now acknowledges what he was slower to accept during the years of active conflict. The uneven partnership he described in the documentary was real, and it created genuine frustration. But Garfunkel's contributions were not simply decorative. It was Garfunkel who pushed Simon to write the third verse of "Bridge Over Troubled Water," a decision that transformed a modest gospel hymn into an epic that would win 6 Grammy Awards and become one of the best-selling singles in the history of Columbia Records. Without that push, the song might have remained a smaller, quieter thing. The voice that sang it was not interchangeable. Simon has come to understand that his resentment during the live performances of that song was something he needed to work through privately, not something that reflected any failure on Garfunkel's part. He has said many times that he was sorry he did not sing "Bridge Over Troubled Water" himself. At the final concert of his 2018 farewell tour, he introduced the song by saying, "I'm going to reclaim my lost child." That reclamation was personal, not a rebuke of Garfunkel. It was a man finally doing something he had put off for 5 decades. The most significant development in recent years came quietly, without fanfare. In late 2024, Garfunkel revealed that he and Simon had shared a lunch together for the first time in many years. During that meeting, Garfunkel looked at Simon and asked what had happened between them, why they had not seen each other. Simon mentioned a past interview in which Garfunkel had said something that had genuinely hurt him. Garfunkel's response was immediate. "I cried when he told me how much I had hurt him." That lunch did not erase 50 years, but it acknowledged them. And acknowledgement, after so long, is not nothing. Garfunkel, speaking about the reunion with People magazine, said he is back in touch with Paul Simon and that their music continues to reach people of every generation. Watching Simon perform Homeward Bound at the SNL 50th anniversary in February 2025 alongside Sabrina Carpenter, Garfunkel offered only generosity. It was nice to see the response the audience gave them. "I am very grateful, and I know Paul is too." There is something significant in that. A man who once called his former partner an idiot in the press, watching that partner perform their shared legacy on one of the biggest stages in American television and responding with gratitude. Simon, for his part, has been equally measured. He understands now that the partnership was not something he could have built alone. The voice people heard on those records was Garfunkel's. The words they remember were Simon's. Neither half produced the whole. That clarity, which took decades to arrive, is the kind that only comes after the fighting has exhausted itself. Simon has observed that great art often comes from conflict and tension, and that the best work of his career happened when 2 genuinely different approaches to music were forced to coexist. His instinct for structure and lyrical precision found its emotional counterpart in Garfunkel's voice. Remove either element and something essential is lost. That is not a comfortable truth for a man who spent years insisting he could have achieved the same results independently, but it is an honest one. At 84, Simon no longer has the energy or the inclination to maintain old grievances. The hearing loss alone taught him something about time. When the instrument you rely on to hear your own music is threatened, the arguments about credit and billing and who deserved more of the spotlight start to sound like what they always were: distractions from the actual thing. The actual thing was the music. It still is. With this, we have come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do well to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. To enjoy more thrilling stories, click now on the following video that pops up on your screen.